Hello, is that work? Okay. It is not a dirty secret that there has never been much of popular appetite for the idea of Europe. The European Union has been an elite project, and a very pragmatic one at that. There is nothing very inspiring or very idealistic about the so-called freedoms of the European Union, the freedom of movement of goods, services, people, and money. Anybody who is ready to die for those freedoms must be out of their mind. It is logical then that one of the most persistent sources of the infamous crisis of Europe has been popular indifference. Just 4 years ago, I was invited here in London to speak at the Battle of Ideas forum on a panel titled, "Is Europe Boring?" That was the year when the EU was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Yes, there is peace and prosperity are boring, but Europe is no longer boring. And the UK referendum vote in June put an end to the crisis based on indifference. Brexit and the passions it stirred displayed that Europe matters to its inhabitants. Brexit, in fact, I believe, transformed Europe from a project of elites to a project of its citizens. Conflicts, turbulence, affect, be it negative or positive, are symptoms of the existence, even of the vitality of an entity. We should celebrate conflict. However, Brexit created a curious situation which I would like to describe as a crisis of a crisis. A crisis is a state of an extreme challenge to an entity's existence with only two possible outcomes: death or radical transformation. Shortly after the negative vote in June, it became clear that Brexit creates more problems than it solves, and even those that was meant to solve might be unsolvable by those means. So as Britain acted on its thanatos, its death drive, it ruled out the option of death, of dissolution of the Union, and therefore it solved its existential crisis. How about the other solution of the crisis, the transformation? The transformative power of crisis was, in fact, how European integration was meant to happen. To quote from Jean Monnet's memoirs, "I have always believed that Europe would be built through crisis and that it would be the sum of their solutions." However, nowadays the road of transformative crisis, of transformative solutions, is blocked by radical disagreement. We have Eastern Europe opposing Western Europe on social reform and North versus South on economic policy. So we're in a situation of radical ungovernmentality, what I call a crisis of a crisis. So I do not believe that the road ahead can be found in grand ideas such as the recently proposed global foreign policy and security strategy. Such grand visions have always proven to be divisive and come to nothing. But there is a path, the traces of which can be found in the reasons for the earlier tacit endorsement of the project of the times when Europe was boring. Publics endorsed their leaders' experimentation in European integration based on a very broad notion that Europe is a benevolent power. Even more, that belonging to Europe has the power of bringing nations to their excellence. Belonging to Europe makes us not less British, Bulgarian, German. It makes us be British, Bulgarian, or German at our best. Let us call this Europe's vocation for achieving national exemplarity. Now, this positive attachment to Europe as an uplifting force was tangible when the post-communist countries were joining the Union. I will draw on the example I know best from my native Bulgaria. Now, Bulgarians have always related to Europe as a force of superior manner of being modern. The word European is a synonym of civilized, of sophisticated. It designates a certain noble modernity. Joining Europe was meant to compensate certain Balkan provincialism as well as a deficiency in being modern, to be Bulgarian at our best. This is a narrative that long predated the European Union and long predated communist regimes, but with the fall of communism, there was another dimension of attachment to Europe that emerged. Of course, people were seduced by the prosperity of the West, but they also saw the EU as a force able to protect them from their corrupt leaders who were robbing them of the chance of becoming properly, nobly modern. The EU was seen as a way of becoming a democracy at its best. Now, I believe that this role of Europe in achieving national exemplarity is more broadly valid. For Germany, EU membership has helped cleanse the idea of national greatness from the toxins of chauvinism, thus gaining Germany the image of a benevolent power. For Britain and France, EU membership meant being cosmopolitan without the crutches of imperialism. We were reminded this morning in Ian Kershaw's talk that Britain joined at a time when of national decline, so the EU was this, hopefully, a force to pull it up. It is this function of exemplarity that Europe has lost. The growing disaffection with Europe now in Bulgaria and other new member states has much to do with EU disappointing these hopes as political corruption, mismanagement, and impoverishment have grown after accession. Now Bulgarians experience themselves as being at their worst, and many blame the EU for this. Now this sentiment is, I believe, more broadly spread. From Britain to Greece, the EU is being accused of bringing the countries to their worst state of existence. And this is not just a matter of bad, malicious information. There is an overarching cause for that. Some 20 years ago, the policy regime of the European Union, the policy regime that took shape in the European Union, can be described as what I call a socially irresponsible rule, where political and economic policy objectives are pursued without regard for their impact on society. This is neither a matter of bad political will or the wrong ideological commitments, but rather a matter of the institutionalized distribution of policy competencies and commitments in the European Union. So let me explain. The Single European Act was signed in 1987, came into force exactly 22 years ago in November 1994. Since then, the protection of this trans-European market economy became the core function of the EU decisional bodies, which is reflected in the stratification of policy competencies in the EU. The EU has, or since then, acquired an exclusive competence in ensuring the competitive nature of the single market. This is in the treaties, as well as in matters of commercial policy, so foreign economic policy. EU law in these spheres has supremacy and direct effect vis-à-vis national legislation. So we see how the logic of market efficiency, for which the institutions received an explicit mandate, gained political hegemony in disregard of the social consequences of market efficiency, a job left to national governments. In this way, raison d'économie took the place of raison d'État, a certain policy logic that is self-referential. This is how the very constitutional structure of EU policy unleashed what I described as a socially irresponsible rule in Europe. There has been one distinct outcome or effect of that. European societies were plagued by massive economic and social uncertainty. This is, I believe, the common denominator behind these very strange bedfellows that the Brexit vote put together, the losers of globalization, but also the winners of globalization, that they're leaders who wanted more free market economy. So this economic uncertainty, that if you're follow me, is a result of these institutionalized policies of lack of social responsibility for economic policy. It is destabilizing life worlds. It is triggering risk aversion instincts even among the winners of globalization, and is prompting people to seek in vain shelter in national economic sovereignty, which is often mistaken or takes the language of a quest for more local democracy. Telling in this regard is the nature of anti-immigrant sentiment, which I want to address next. While the rise of xenophobia is usually a consequence of economic malaise and political turmoil, as in the Nazi Germany of the 30s, the current wave of xenophobia arose in the affluent 1990s. So all these right-wing parties, anti-European extreme right parties, they formed in the affluent 90s. Years of robust growth, rising living standards, and low unemployment. So let us remember that anti-immigrant sentiment was not triggered by the economic crisis in Europe, it preceded it. However, the affluent 90s were also that decade when rapid economic liberalization and open market policies were enacted under the EU agenda for global competitiveness. So the new populism might be using the old available language of xenophobia, but is driven by quite different motivation than the political chauvinism and cultural superiority or arrogance that defined the post-World War II far right. The hostility to foreigners now is predominantly economic in essence. It is related to perceived, and I stress perceived, threats to socioeconomic well-being, especially job loss, brought about by the open borders in the context of globalization, for which the EU was an agent. British jobs for British workers sums it up pretty nicely. This means that the roots of disaffection and discontent across Europe have less to do with European integration itself or with falling standards of living and growing inequality, as they have to do with a type of political economy that engenders socioeconomic insecurity to which most citizens are somehow subjected. This has entailed the failure of Europe to play its role of exemplarity, of helping member states be at their best. Actually, it is triggering the opposite effect. It is making member states to experience themselves as being at their worst. Now, if I'm right that it is the institutionalized insecurity that is the culprit, we need to embark on a counter-project, which I have called Building in Europe, on EU level, a political economy of trust. It consists in a set of policies and institutions which explicitly, very consciously target economic insecurity, fight economic insecurity, in defiance of much of the old ideological truths of the left and the right. Economic and social precariousness can neither be fixed by labor market deregulation and austerity policies, nor via a resurrection of the bureaucratic redistributive welfare state. So we need a new mix. Of course, I have all planned it out, laid it out in full detail, but I have no time to address those details now. I just want to mention the most important points, probably. Globalization. There is nothing very natural about globalization. It is rule-based global market integration. So we can have all the kind of rules we want. We can redesign globalization. That is the European Union can redesign globalization with high labor and environmental protection standards. So a sort of a socialist globalization, not stopping globalization. But in terms of internal market policy, we need to get the labor market outsiders in. That is why labor market liberalization can be a good idea. Yet, it needs to be coupled with building a strong social safety net at EU level. And that would entail, for instance, bringing into public hands at EU level, not at national level, bringing into public hands all companies who cannot be which cannot be properly exposed to competition, and which are extracting actually rents from market domination, and then source social policy from these companies, which might be actually functioning on market principles, a little bit like the Amtrak in the US. So there's a way of creating a very pragmatic synergy between radical economic liberalization and a robust social safety net at EU level. Admittedly, this proposal is not in the remits of the politically thinkable. Hopefully, not for long. Hope, in contrast to optimism, as my beloved playwright, dissident President Václav Havel observed, is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense. So if this proposal for building a political economy of trust at EU level makes sense, then it would be a matter of political decency to make it thinkable. And I believe that institutions like the British Academy are very well placed to transform what makes sense into a politically thinkable agenda. Thank you.